Namassarvebhya. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here with the Vande Mataram group. So first of all, I'd like to thank the young students of the Vande Mataram group who are interested in subjects like this. So it goes to show how aware they are, not just in engineering, but also about current affairs and politics and things that affect all our lives. So a very big hand to the Vande Mataram group. We all know that liberal arts is taking a very big step in India through the new education policy. The floodgates have been open to have foreign universities come into India, to open their shop up for liberal arts and to train young students in the liberal arts. But seldom do we ask ourselves what this liberal arts contains. While in the US and the West, liberal arts has pure sciences like physics, chemistry, and then mathematics as well, it also has a lot of social sciences and humanities, which are all with the Western drishti. Interestingly, in recent times, you have many fake fields of study, like gender studies, fat studies, queer studies, post-colonial studies, which are based on intersectional feminism, critical race theory, queer theory, and the like. Now, fat studies, one would think, because you're all STEM-oriented people, would think would solve the problems of obesity. Instead, it celebrates fatness and makes identity victim groups of people who are fat and brings about concepts like body shaming and celebrates obesity in a very big way. Now, most of these or all of these new fields which end in the word studies, they are based on subjectivity. So it has nothing to do with objective pursuit of the truth, although you probably have heard Harvard's motto has veritas, which in Latin means truth. So the goal of the university is to pursue truth, but subjectivity essentially supplements everything over objectivity. Even mathematics has become subjective, where 2 plus 2 need not necessarily equal 4. And this has been sort of stated in Twitter by Harvard's public health, the Chan School of Public Health, which some of our billionaires also fund. Piramal funds the public health program in Harvard. And so they promote things like 2 plus 2 is not 4. In fact, there is a Stanford professor by the name of Joe Bowler, who is also a woke professor, I would say, and she is developing California's mathematics curriculum in their schools, and California's mathematics curriculum in junior, elementary, middle, and high schools have plummeted. And it's amazing to know that she has nothing to do, her background is not in mathematics, it's in social science. So people who are developing textbooks in mathematics have not been trained in mathematics, and they are actually making these huge changes in pedagogy and curricula. In fact, one of Byju's experts for mathematics is Dr. Bowler. So just check that out. And it's also coming to India, just to show. So people are paying money, going to Byju's and getting this training for their children. Now, the entire umbrella of grievance studies, basically many American professors are also very peeved. They do not like what these people put out in terms of scholarship. So a bunch of people got together and wrote hoax papers to see if grievance studies journals would accept them. And guess what? They wrote 20 odd papers, and I think 14 odd of them got accepted. Some of them were awarded great prizes as well. So, for example, there's a paper on research on rape culture among the dogs at a dog park. And this research went, to talk about how they studied hours of observing dogs humping in a dog park, and then came up with all kinds of patriarchy type issues among dogs. Now in America, I've talked about liberal arts coming into India, but one has not looked at what liberal arts has done for American students. The US student loans are exorbitantly high, and Biden had to sort of forgive some of these loans. And students that study these kinds of areas don't get a job because they're really not skilled for anything. The universities charge the same amount of money for a class in fat studies as they do for metal forming or VLSI design. So it's become a money maker for the universities with very less substance. Now, the praxis of all of this, so you have this whole body of grievance studies in terms of scholarship developed, and with all Marxism, pedagogy and scholarship, you have something called praxis, which is the application of this in the real world. So one of the applications is the DEI office. So when they are dismantling something, they also develop infrastructure to make this dismantling viable and quick and efficient. So you have all over US campuses diversity, equity, and inclusion offices with actually a dean in charge. And I was very sad to know a few months ago that IIT Delhi has a diversity, equity, and inclusion office. In their inauguration, we had Justice Chandrachud making statements on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like all Marxist terms, everything sounds really nice. Diversity, who's not for diversity? But diversity actually means people who look different but have the same thinking. So they look different and have different sexual orientations and preferences, but they think alike. So diversity is actually not really diversity. And inclusion is achieved by excluding certain groups of people who have had historical, in their view, historical privilege, and hence are oppressors, so they are not included. And equity essentially sounds very much like equality, and one would conflate the two, but equity has nothing to do with equality. Equity is to ensure that outcomes are all equal. So despite reservations in our IITs, they feel that the product, the students coming out are all not equal. And how do you make them equal? Is by diminishing the standards of entrance, or even doing away with examinations altogether, because anything to do with merit, which I think Rajiv Ji can talk about a little more, is considered something that's born out of patriarchy. And like I said, you cannot objectively argue with all of them because it's a subjective field. All these fields are subjective, but they've entered mathematics, they've entered the STEM fields, they've entered the IITs. So you have DEI offices even in IIT Delhi. Now, so one of the things they do is to have these kinds of structures for dismantling. The another thing that they have is to produce activists. So the social sciences, what they do is they don't get jobs, but they do produce activists who are all the time, on the streets, lifting their hands and asking for this right and that right and talking about oppression. Now, to give you an example, right, there is I wouldn't say scholar, but there is a person by the name of Sayantan Datta, right, who has an MSc in cognitive sciences. But he teaches writing and oral communication in Kriya University. So Ashoka and Kriya are the new trendy liberal arts colleges. Everybody is talking about how liberal arts are great. You have many subjects and you get different viewpoints and all of that. All sounds good. Like everything leftist, it sounds great on paper. But anyway, let's go back to Sayanthan Datta. So he has a master's in cognitive sciences, but he teaches oral communication and writing. Essentially, he's an activist. So Datta received a diversity reporting grant in 2021 from the National Association of Science Writers. It's an American organization that promotes these kinds of woke activists. Now, the grant was given to him. It's to explore an impressive range of issues affecting indigenous peoples, neurodiverse individuals, I don't even know what that means, and the transgender non-binary community. So when the IIT chief commented that the IIT Madras chief commented somewhere that there is no discrimination at IIT Madras and that we will not allow it, and if there is, we will deal with it severely, right? Datta tweeted, IIT Madras is a hotbed of casteist discrimination. In fact, IITs survive on casteism. IITs produce castes to continue the myth of merit. So this is what happens when you open up the floodgates to liberal arts colleges, and this is what students at Kriya, this is the kind of person students at Kriya are learning from. Ashoka costs 10 lakhs a year, and there are people who are paying this for 4 years. The other whole thing is about pronouns. People's choices and preference should not, involve forcing others to use pronouns. Now, a pronoun is generally used when the person is not there. So if there's a proper noun, and if a male wants to have a female name, we will honor that and call the person by whatever name they choose. It's a proper noun. But a pronoun essentially is something that you talk about a person, right? And so they force you even when they are not involved in a conversation. So, and you have to cave into the trans activist demand, otherwise you'll be called transphobic. Now, this is sort of the devolving of the English language. And I'll just leave you with a quotation from Time. Quote, Time spoke to genderqueer author and illustrator Maya Kobabe on about ear work. It's her work or his work, EIR, ear work. The efforts to restrict access to ear writing and what E is EY make of the current cultural moment. Now, one is supposed to remember. So it's not just he, she, they, them. It's all these funky, whatever people feel like. They make up their pronouns, and one is supposed to remember them and use those pronouns while talking about them. I can't think of a more narcissistic way of presenting oneself when you force others to use personal pronouns. And if somebody looks like a male, we address them as he, and somebody looks like a female, regardless of what their scene is, we will address them as a female. And I think language is meant for communication, and this sort of arm twisting and forcing people to use, yes, especially young people, to put their pronouns and make this use of pronouns a widely acceptable thing, which it has become, is a very sad turn. And I think as youngsters, you should, stand up against it. Because nobody can force us to, if a narcissist comes and forces you to use certain pronouns, you should not oblige, because that's not part of language. Language has a specific need in society. It fulfills a certain specific need. So we need to make sure we don't, cave into these sorts of pressures from these leftist woke activists. With that, I leave it to Rajiv ji. Thank you.